Hi, welcome to the final filmmaker panel of the 2020 Ottawa Canadian Film Festival. I'm Hingman Leung, and I'm your host today. The Ottawa Canadian Film Festival is a cultural not-for-profit organization whose mission is to recognize, promote, and celebrate the art of cinema by showcasing Canadian films and filmmakers. The festival gratefully acknowledges the financial support of the City of Ottawa and the Ontario Arts Council. This year, our festival is entirely online due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. The films have been split into 3 screening weekends, and we've just finished the final one. I have with me today the filmmakers involved in many of the films featured in the final weekend. They are Tamer Soliman, director, producer, co-writer of The Great Disconnect; Sarah Douglas, co-writer and story editor of The Great Disconnect; Patrick Weiers, director of I Hope They Remember My Name; Sarah Wray, director of Guardians of the Grasslands; Ben Wilson, cinematographer, Guardians of the Grasslands; and finally, Rob Jacobsen, director and writer of Tessellate. So before I get into the audience questions that were sent in over the weekend, I'd like to ask our filmmakers to introduce themselves. So I'm going to start with folks from The Great Disconnect.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tamer. It's great to be here. Thank you, Hingman, for hosting us today. And to all the other filmmakers, watched all your films. They were awesome. Yeah, it's just such a pleasure to be able to do this virtually. Obviously, it would be a lot funner to all be together, but clearly this is the way that it's going for most film festivals. And yeah, our film, The Great Disconnect, is basically about how we live in a world that is seemingly connected, and yet people are feeling the effects of social isolation and feeling disconnected. We had a blast making the film, and I'll let Sarah kind of add a piece.
So my role was co-writer along with Tamer, and we had some consulting writers as well, and also story editor of the film.
Hey, I'm the writer and director of the film I Hope They Remember My Name. It's a found footage film. It tells a story about a famous vlogger, social media influencer, who's struggling with clinical depression. And he takes a trip to Asia with hopes of finding some meaning.
Hi, I'm Sarah Wray. My partner and I, Ben Wilson, created Guardians of the Grasslands. The inspiration of the film actually came from our background in being ranchers and farmers ourselves. And it was a really big passion of ours, and we really wanted to dive in and talk about one of the most precious resources we believe Canada has, which is our grasslands.
I'm Ben, and I've been a filmmaker for a few years, kind of doing freelance videography for about 10 years. Sarah and I have been working together for most of that 10 years, and we're based in the small town of Bashaw, Alberta, kind of right in the middle of Alberta, a really small town, agricultural town. Yeah. So we're really happy to be here. I actually went to university in Ottawa, so it was really exciting for me when I found out that our film got into the OCAN Festival. And it's great that we're able to connect on Zoom and be able to do this, even though we weren't able to gather in person. So congrats to everybody else who was part of the festival, and thank you, Hingman, for inviting us on.
Hi, I'm Rob Jacobsen. I'm the writer and director of Tessellate. I'm based in Vancouver right now, but I grew up not far away from Bashaw. Tessellate is just a story, takes place in sort of a near future where the technology to custom make your personality has occurred, and sort of the weirdness of that and people handling that kind of situation. I started more as a writer. That's what I did all my university for, and just kind of fell into making movies because I thought they were fun. And that's what I'm doing now.
That's great. Well, I'm very excited to get to ask you all of the questions that have come in through our audience Q&A online. And actually, the first one is directed at you, Rob, for your film Tessellate. First of all, this person wanted to say very good art direction. So congratulations on that. Can you talk about how you went about setting on the look?
Yeah, so there's basically two distinct kind of looks in the film. One is a very, very white, a little bit blown out in the lighting and stuff like that. So it's just very, very, very white. Almost like one of those endless space kind of things like in the Matrix where they're loading the guns and stuff. We're not loading any guns, but we wanted that kind of vibe. And then the other one is very high contrast, moody, dark, and stuff like that, a little more claustrophobic. And that was a deliberate choice to kind of look at the kind of the dichotomy of those two different worlds occurring in the same, sort of dealing with the same kind of situation. And I created a lookbook where I stole visuals from other movies and stuff like that to give to my DOP. And then he made that happen because I wasn't going to be able to do that. Our producer found a really great space that was really tiny, but had the white wall kind of thing. And then he did brilliant stuff with angles and lighting to make it look much bigger than it really was. And my wife, who was also the lead actor and set designer, we bought stuff from IKEA and disassembled it and put it out and built some walls and stuff, and then put it all back together and returned it to IKEA the weekend after we shot it. So to save money on the budget. So that was kind of how that came about. And the other spaces were just, one of them was one of the producers' houses, and we just, lit it and did all sorts of crazy stuff to kind of make it look claustrophobic and small and all that kind of stuff. So that was pretty much it. Yeah.
Great. I have a follow-up question as you were talking about this process, because in some of the discussions that I've been lucky to have with other filmmakers is the concept of intentionality. And it sounds like it was very intentional, the look that you had on your film. What were some of the conversations you had in this process with your team that helped you hone in on that look?
It's a great question. I mean, it was super collaborative because I mean, and we were kind of this weird disparate mix of people that kind of came together to make it. So I'd never met the DOP. He volunteered to help us. He's a fairly well-known guy out here, and he volunteered to come on and help us when he'd read the script. And so I was just giving him images. That's all I had, was just like, I had a lookbook, I sent it to him, and he said, yeah, I can do that. And I had no idea what this guy was going to do, and he showed up and he just made it work. And I don't really know what he was doing. He just made it look good. And he totally nailed the vision, which was amazing to see happen in real time. I worked really closely with my wife, Jen, to do some of the set design and stuff like that. She's got a great artistic eye. So she could take what I was giving to her verbally and then go, oh, I know what that looks like, and go find pieces for it. We did a lot of Value Village shopping and stuff like that for this kind of thing. So those were my two big collaborators for the look. And so for Josh, it was all just images and stuff like that I found from him. And for Jen, it was more conversational. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, it's so important to have people that you trust to work with, and people that bring in their ideas into the project that end up being kind of helping to push beyond that initial idea. So that's great. And today we have a few other duos that are going to be on this panel. So I'm going to ask the next audience question to our friends from Guardians of the Grasslands. And there's a question to them about how you came upon this story. And this person who wrote in their question was fascinated.
Awesome. Well, it was actually pretty interesting how we came about it. As I mentioned before, I grew up in the agricultural industry. So grew up on a farm my entire life, and we were on a shoot about a week prior to shooting Guardians, and a conservation group that was there represented, Ducks Unlimited, was talking with us, and they said that the Canadian grasslands were the most endangered. And I was shocked. I didn't know that. As ranchers, we've always taken care of the land, and it's always been really important, but that was not on my radar. So Ben and I talked going home that day and said, if we ever get a chance to tell this story, we've got to tell it. Because if it's not on our radar, then it's probably not on very many people's. So a week later, with divine intervention, we were on site at another shoot, completely unrelated. And we sort of looked, and every single person who we needed was there. And we said, let's do it. So we shot Guardians while shooting another film. And everything came together beautifully, and it was a really neat experience. And we were chasing clouds the whole time. There was rain in every corner of the mountains that day, but it was really incredible that it was just sort of on the fly, to be quite honest with you, and so everything worked out really well.
Yeah, it all really came together quite quickly. The shoot was just a day and a half at a ranch called the Waldron Ranch, in about an hour south of Calgary. Yeah. So it's this beautiful, really large 65,000 acre ranch in the base of the foothills, at the base of the Rockies there, south of Calgary. And it's not owned by one family. It's called a cooperative. So there's a bunch of different shareholders that collectively manage and graze with all of their own small herds of cattle. They bring them there to graze on the Waldron, and just being there was really breathtaking and magical. And then when we got back home to Basha, the film came together pretty quickly in the editing room too, over the course of a few weeks. So we feel really fortunate that we were able to create the story.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And as you were describing this process, it made me think of another film that had a travel element to it, because you were talking about, filming a bit on the fly and also being in these amazing places. Now I have a question then for Patrick Weiers, who made I Hope They Remember My Name, which has a lot of travel in it as well. And so this question specifically was about whether it was structured and planned before you shot it, and what led you to making this type of film.
Oh, thank you very much. I like to work in the user-generated found footage space. That's kind of the aesthetic I'm carving up for myself, and that's the aesthetic I'm most interested in. I think that's kind of an aesthetic that has kind of been underutilized by narrative films, even though we're so used to engaging with it, on a non-narrative, non-fiction level online. So that was something I wanted to explore. The initial idea was sparked by the death of Anthony Bourdain, actually. He was a guy that lived such an envious lifestyle. He was traveling around the world. A lot of people really thought, oh, that's one of the best lives you could live, eat your way around the world. But then we realized that he was struggling with clinical depression. So that was kind of the initial spark of the idea. I was also really fascinated by movies that, and it's becoming a little more trendy now, is to shoot in these kind of foreign locations. A lot of countries are opening up to foreigners coming and shooting there, and obviously this was a little more like no permits, a little more guerrilla style. So I was really interested in that, and I also wanted to just explore the the kind of rising influence of social media, as well as the, sadly, as well as the rise of mental health issues. So although a bunch of ideas kind of coming together there.
And then once you kind of landed on this inspiration and these ideas, what was next? What came next for you in terms of crafting the story and turning it into a film?
Mm-hmm. It was watching a lot of vloggers online, a lot of travel vloggers, getting inspiration there, specifically in the locations that I was traveling to try to figure out what are kind of the quote unquote touristy places to visit. So yeah, it came together in that, and then I knew that I wanted to travel, so it was kind of an excuse to continue working while I was traveling too. I kind of looked at it. I was traveling for 5 months, so I kind of looked at it as a large life experience, and to try to replicate some of the emotions that I was experiencing while I was traveling onto the screen. So yeah, it was quite a long process. As you can see, maybe in the movie, if you notice that, my hair and my facial hair kind of grows over the course, which was obviously real. And some of these shots were weeks apart, kind of glued together. Yeah, it was, like I said, there's a lot of things that came together in the end for me to be able to get it done, which I was grateful for. And I've met a bunch of people along the way who allowed me to shoot in certain locations and stuff. So that was a lot of fun too.
Watching it made me feel a lot of different emotions, and I personally watched a lot of YouTube and a lot of vloggers, and so it was really interesting to kind of get your perspective of the other side of the camera. And some of the themes explored in your film actually are addressed in another one of the films this weekend, and it was The Great Disconnect. And so we have another question that came in through the audience Q&A. And this question was, how do you think the current pandemic has affected our ability to connect one-on-one? For that question, I'm going to turn it over to Tamer and Sarah from The Great Disconnect.
Yeah, it's a great question. And as you may guess, we've been asked that quite a bit, with different screenings of our film. But the funny thing is that we made this film pre-pandemic, and it's just sort of really wild of sort of what's happened since we finished the film. And so we did have some screenings, prior to the pandemic, and people really appreciated the topic, and they said, wow, this is really something that you've really opened up my eyes to. Like, of course, I think about health in terms of eating and exercise, but I never really considered my social ties being a part of that. And then those same people started writing to us again during the pandemic and thinking, I can't stop thinking about your film, because I'm so grateful that I got this message prior to the pandemic. So I think for us, we've really realized in all the different showings that we've done that people have said to us, or it seems as if you've had strong community ties prior to the pandemic and all the social restrictions happening right now, you're weathering the storm a little bit easier than maybe people who didn't prioritize those face-to-face human interactions. I think, the terms like Zoom fatigue are popular now. And I think that, if you were using tools like social media before as your primary way of connecting with people, and now you're sort of left as that's really your only way to connect with people, I think we're really all feeling the drain of that. So our hope really is that people can take these lessons, and hopefully when it is safe to do so, they don't forget. And maybe if they haven't thought about changing their ways prior to the pandemic, they'll definitely make an effort to connect more one-on-one in person with people after.
Yeah, and just to echo what Sarah was saying is that this is awesome. I mean, the fact that we can do this is really, really cool. But I think we could all agree, if we were in the same room having a pint, cheersing, it would be better, and we'd have different emotions. And we have an interviewee in the film named Sherry Turkel, so we were able to license pieces of her TED Talk. And she has a book called Reclaiming Conversation, where you know, as people, we're kind of looking at social media and Zoom and saying, oh, wow, like if we didn't have this, we'd be a disaster. And maybe that's true. But ultimately, her argument is that, you know, there are just different, you know, being in real life has different, you know, hormonal implications. It's just how we have evolved evolutionarily. And so this is really temporary. And that when, as Sarah says, once the pandemic's over, I think it's going to be really important to get back to connecting in real life and just knowing that this is there just in case. This is there if we can't get together. And basically, that's ultimately what we mentioned in the film as being really important. So okay, so yeah, so that's basically the best way I think we can answer that question.
Just in case there's another pandemic, we all know how to use Zoom now.
Yeah, exactly.
And so do all our grandparents.
Exactly. What a relief. What a relief.
I just wanted to comment on Patrick's film, and as you said, Hingman, I felt so much emotion watching Patrick's film, because I almost feel like it was really, I think it's the reality for a lot of people, as he depicted, just as himself vlogging. And there's a couple of documentaries right now playing Social Dilemma, and there's another one just like purely on influencers where there's so much power, but yet people are feeling so lonely and individual. And I think that it's just there's two aspects to our film that we delve into. The first is just the idea of having buds and having pints with, but then there's the other aspect of just making a difference in the world. And I find that, you know, we're caught in, you know, what can we do for ourselves? And ultimately that doesn't lead us to any sort of joy, or not a lot of joy, but ultimately that, you know, our joy is going to come from really involving ourselves with other people. And that, you know, there's, you know, you should have you know, we need to be a bit more intuitive about that. So I just wanted to comment on that. I thought that was powerful.
No, thank you very much for those kind words. I really enjoyed your film as well. I was curious, do you have any plans to expand the story? Because I feel like a lot more people need to see the message.
Yeah, that's another, well, everyone now, because of what's happened, has saying, you know, where's the part 2? You know, where is this going? You know, that you had this message before. Is it the same now? Is it different? And I think for us, it's just, we're so grateful that people are paying more attention to this topic, because we accidentally fell into it, because Tamer's background is in health and wellness, and we were more in terms of making films and documentary films on more health related topics. And even though this is a health related topic, it's just kind of a broader topic. And so we kind of accidentally fell into it, and we didn't know about all the great work that happens, like in municipalities, in, you know, communities, and that this is really an area that we've learned, or we believe now definitely, that it is a strong intersection. You know, it's a strong determinant of health in general. And we really are grateful that more people are starting to pay attention to this area, even just in terms of mental health. So we're just hoping that it has shined the light on a kind of work that we think that more people should be paying attention to. So whether that's policymakers or funders or whatever, like it really we need to start talking seriously about community well-being.
Yeah, and that's the strength of the storytelling approach of documentary films, and it's a really great way of shining a light on an issue that is important in a way that is accessible and shareable, and that people can connect to it in a more emotional way. And I was wondering actually if Sarah and Ben in Guardians of the Grasslands, if you have any reflections on how that has rolled out for you in your film.
Yeah, I think for us, the biggest thing for us is actually that connection point too. You know, when we look at the history of cattle or ranchers and the environment, it's not always been bright or viewed very well by the public. And it's always been this friction point, I think, in society, or in the recent, last 10-ish years. And it was really important to us because our experience over the course of our work in filmmaking is that conservation and ranching go hand in hand, and that's not what you really hear in the public. So we really wanted to talk with the conservation groups that work daily with ranchers and with farmers to protect, all of the habitat and the wildlife and the water that we all use. And so it was a really critical thing for us to connect the things that a lot of the public really pay attention to, which are those areas, and showcase alongside with somebody like Mick, who has the most passion in the film that we've ever seen. Somebody connected with the land has. She really loves it when she's out and she touches all the flowers and connects with the earth. It's really incredible. And so, just sort of similar to what everybody else is saying here today, those connections, it's not just humans, it's nature, and it's connecting back to the things that really ground us and that's what can feed us. And that's really what we hope the film does, is reconnect us with something that we're maybe a little bit removed from currently in today's world.
Yeah, it's so interesting how all these films are so different, but they have a bit of that common theme or connection around connection and also raising awareness about different issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I was thinking about, what brings all of these films together, it's absolutely that. And it brings me back to thinking about Tessellate, which is a film that is it's a narrative film. It's not a documentary, but for me, I took away from it a sense that it's important to strive to be true to who you are because you have value as a human being, and I think that's a really, really important message, and I think that is kind of, it fits with all of the films that we're talking about today. And so, Rob, I was wondering if you had any reflections that you want to share.
Yeah, I think this is all kind of fascinating. I wasn't super conscious of how connected these films were until we started talking about them. I think it's really cool to see that from very, very different stylized films and stuff like that, narrative, documentary, found footage, not like it's really cool to see that and see how different people connect over the same theme and the same sort of like very human quality that we're all sort of striving for here. And I think that's really interesting. If I may, I had a totally kind of like different question based kind of on that same idea, like more about the craft of it, because my film was sort of painfully written and like, or painstakingly, I should say, written. Painfully, if you have that opinion, that's fine. And you know, I was a little bit specific with the actors about some of the lines and stuff like that, just because of the dialogue was very important. It was very dialogue centric. I have the feeling that's quite different with everybody else maybe here. I mean, I don't know about how Patrick, how scripted yours was, or if it was a kind of improv or if it was something you were very specifically like outlining ahead of time. With the Guardians of the Galaxy folks, you did that in such a short period of time. It blows my mind and gives me anxiety just like hearing about doing it that fast. And I'm just sort of curious with everybody, like how much outlining and planning and scripting went into a lot of this ahead of time, because mine was a lot. And I'm curious just to hear other people who maybe did it with more seat of the pants and then arranging it all in post, or if it was like very improv heavy, or kind of how all that worked.
Yeah, my film was basically not scripted. There were only two really events that I knew wanted to take place, which was the climax and having the young woman come in and join me on the trip. But everything else, you know, it's kind of advantageous, I think, to be a writer and an actor, because you kind of are writing in your own words, and you are quick to memorize them. So a lot of times, you know, it was quite easy to knock out a scene when there were dialogue, but other times there were certain lines that made it into the final cut that I kind of just discovered when I, you know, take after take, and it's like, oh, maybe I'll add a pause here, a beat there, and stuff like that. So, you know, and obviously being a one-man band type situation, I wasn't getting any feedback from anyone, which was nice. It's in some respects, you know, because I had full creative vision, but I think it, you know, in the end, and I was able to get feedback during the post process, and I think that helped a lot. And obviously, I think in the end, it's about finding that balance too between collaborative work and you know, staying true to your creative vision.
Yeah, and for us, I think what was really beneficial is Ben and I have been working together. He's actually my brother-in-law, but he didn't come from a farm. So he came from an aerospace engineering background. And so we spent, I think really with Guardians, it was 10 years of preparing us. So we, you know, typically the film work we did before was a lot on stories of the agricultural industry, may it be soil or cattle or whatever it is environmentally. And so what was really important to us, and it's always been I think something that makes our film work really great in terms of explanation compared to what a lot of the industry is pushing out, is that Ben, with his background, allows us to say, do you understand this? Because sometimes that clear, simple explanation is what we're missing. So we were really aware while we were shooting Guardians that it had to be so simply explained that it was easy to consume and walk away with an understanding. So we paid special details to that in the viewing. We took a lot of time with them and had them restate it several times until anybody could understand it. And I think that was sort of the key to the film, is having not only the passion of the people, but clear explanation on what we were speaking of.
But it wasn't so much in contrast to the weeks and weeks of planning, it sounds like you were doing, Rob, and writing and really crafting it ahead of time. For us, we kind of just knew that these grasslands are a precious resource that are disappearing, which we'd heard about from the lady from Ducks Unlimited beforehand. It really inspired Sarah to think of doing this crazy idea. And we knew that people were way more focused on things like the rainforest and the coral reefs disappearing because they're really dramatic and visually like, oh, wow, that's really noticeable when that ecosystem crashes. And when a grasslands disappears, nobody really notices because it just still looks like
grass,
an open field of grass.
Yeah.
Or what is the difference between native grass and tame pasture? I can barely tell the difference, and I've been studying and learning about it now. So we went into this and walked into these interviews knowing that the right people were there, like Sarah said, that we could get this science and we could get the explanations and we could get the passion and all these people that had all this experience, but we didn't really even know exactly what we wanted to ask them about. We just went in with genuine curiosity to say, why is this happening? Why are the grasslands disappearing? What is the role that cattle and ranchers who manage the cattle, what role do they play in this solution or problem? How does that all work? And then people like Ben Campbell started just ripping grass out of the ground and saying, okay, so you got a piece of grass, this is how carbon sequestration works. And he just knocked it out of the park with this stellar explanation that just made sense. And we were like, wow, like regular people could understand that without having to be a rancher or a scientist.
Yeah, and what's cool about it for us, I think in the aftermath was the bigger part of it. And we actually spent a lot of time even having scientists review it to make sure the information was credible. So, yeah.
But it was a lot of luck too,
yeah.
that everything came together so quickly.
Yeah.
Over to you, Tamer.
I like to say our film is very organic, which I guess is just a polite way of saying by the seat of our pants. I think also too, from the beginning, the topic shifted quite dramatically. Like at first, Tamer was in the Blue Mountains of Jamaica, looking at different nutritional food and how they're living. And so that was sort of the initial idea. And he was on this research trip and then came back and said, you know what? I really just want to focus on community, because that's really what took me, like that's what I'm remembering, the feeling of being around in this community with these people. So it was like, okay, scrap the whole idea of what we thought we were going to be writing about and pivot to now this idea of community. And like I said, we're not experts on the topic at all. So similar to what Sarah and Ben were saying, it was not, we found these amazing interviewees that would be willing to sit down with us. And I think particularly, like, you know, credit to Tamer for organizing that and the outreach. But also I think because they knew that we didn't have a background in this topic, the way that they explained things to us made it, I think, really digestible for the audience. But then the problem, not a problem, I guess the positive problem was that once we started to learn more, we started to ask more questions. And so that's when we were seeking out more people to talk to and more people to talk to. And so I think it was a series of, we would get lots of footage, look at it, see like what the sound bites were, and then be like, okay, now we need to talk to this person. Okay, now we understand this concept, this piece is missing. Now we need to investigate like urban design. Now we need to look at technology, because as much as we didn't really want to go there, you can't make a film about, you know, this topic without talking about technology in some form. And then even adding Ron Finley in, because we knew that we wanted, you know, once we looked at the footage, we're like, you know, this is really coming from a very like typical privileged kind of point of view, like what not all communities have this stuff. So how do we make this a bigger topic? How do we, you know, address more issues with this? So it was very ongoing, and then came to where we really wanted to, again, have that story element, that connection to it. So if you want to talk about Kirsten or that.
Yeah. Oh no, I mean, one comment I just want to make is Rob just saying how, you know, Sarah and Ben's film just took them such little time in the time frame you guys describe it, and Rob saying that gives him a heart attack to think that it's such a short film. And like as Sarah's saying, our script just kept evolving. It took us, I think, close to 2.5 years to really completing it. So just so you know, Rob, we stuck with it, you know, and we had a sort of, we had a great mentor named George Halverson, who we don't even know what level of filmmaking he was involved in. He would name drop sometimes and we would just be like, what, who did you work with? And it was just, we had him on our side in the sense where he advised us to just make up the script in advance, kind of like, okay, you guys have this concept of social isolation and community, and, you know, just kind of, you know, this is what you're starting off with. And then, as Sarah said, the interviewees came through, and then we had the story of a woman named Kirsten, who is a young professional living in a condo, who is gonna, you know, we convinced to put on a rooftop party. And so, you know, Sarah has great story editing skills and is a quick learner, and George sort of overviewed our script as we kept going through. We had multiple rough drafts where we would send it off to him and he would look at it, and him and Sarah would kind of go through like how the story should kind of come together. So from a documentary perspective, you know, if you were to kind of look at how do you go about making a documentary, you can go about it two ways, right? You can have a script and really stick to it, kind of like how I feel like Sarah and Ben says, you guys can correct me if you're wrong, or you allow the story to evolve largely because you're not experts in the topic, but you know it's important. And ultimately things like urban design and technology and the rise of individuality, I'm saying it like this now, like I understand it, but prior to the film, we would have no clue that those were actually things that people study, or that, you know, the city of Ottawa or the city of Edmonton have, you know, like there are people doing this kind of work who could speak to it. So anyway, so just to kind of give you a background. And then, yeah, we just weaved sort of what Kirsten's story was to what we had with the interviewees. So it was a lot of multiple rough drafts that you just kind of stick with, and you hope that you can come up with a good film. So we're excited that we stuck through it, and we had the budget. Of course, I mean, that's another big thing, is that we had a decent budget to allow us to go back and travel off again and film some more. So I think that was another really important piece, because if we didn't have the budget, we wouldn't have the film that we have now, basically.
And one last quick thing that might horrify Rob is that with the Kirsten story, we didn't know what was going to happen. We invited these people to come to the roof, but we didn't know if they were coming or not. So we were all standing on the roof in Vancouver of her condo building being like, this is going to determine how our film ends. If anybody should have any hope, right? If nobody comes, then what do we do? If people come, great. Like Tamer said, we can see it in our minds. We're hoping that this is our script. We're hoping that people come. We can end on a positive note. But if they don't come, then what's next? And thankfully, we didn't have to go there.
You guys have an alternate ending in your back pocket?
We were at that time like, who's got an idea?
What's gonna happen?
Thank you for sharing all of your processes and thinking, and we're so lucky to have been able to gather this group of filmmakers that are, although your films are so different from each other, I think you are all united by this sense of telling a story, of connection, of human beings and what it means to be human. And with that, I want to go back to the question about how the pandemic has changed the way we connect to each other, because the way that we watch films, the way that we entertain ourselves is now completely different thanks to the pandemic. And so I want to ask you all about, first of all, what's next for you? What are your plans in terms of your filmmaking, but also can you share your thoughts on how you think the pandemic will affect, how you approach filmmaking, how you approach storytelling?
Yeah, it's obviously been kind of a crazy few months with that kind of thing. My wife and I made a web series in our apartment, which is pretty bad, but we made it mostly just to keep ourselves from going crazy, because we just needed something to do, and so that was sort of how filmmaking helped us through the first couple months of the pandemic. And it was just about a woman who's quarantining alone and creates an imaginary friend to keep her company, and that was the story. So yeah, I mean, I think what'll be really interesting, I think, to see from a consumer's point of view is, when this is all over, do we get pandemic stories? Are we going to see the rom-com about people who meet online and then finally meet a year and a half later, and what that's like? Or is there going to be some horror movies about somebody who's supposed to be quarantining alone, but the call's coming from inside the house? Or like, I'm sort of curious about. Or if we're just going to skip it and I'll pretend it didn't happen. I don't know. I think that's kind of interesting, because this is such a big moment globally. Like, how are we going to respond to it with art? I think is, how long is it going to take us to do it? Is it going to be sort of immediate or not? I think that's going to be really fascinating. I think for a lot of us as creators, it's been kind of like a double-edged sword, where in some ways we held that at the beginning, like lockdown, oh, you've got time, work on your art. But at the same time, we were all going into survival mode, and the stress was, I think, really oppressive, and it was really hard to like tell your mind to be creative, do that fun thing you love, when everything else about your entire being is like, just huddle together and don't die. You have to go to the grocery store, and that's like just really, really hard, because everybody's in a mask, and you know that the guy next to you who's coughing on the orange might have COVID. And that's just like anxious. And, so It's been kind of weird. I was fortunate enough that I had a series of books that was already in the works, so I've been publishing those over lockdown, which has been kind of nice to have that. It was already in motion ahead of time. So that's what I've been working on. But even that's been really hard and has been going slower than I would have wanted it to, just because life has been hard. So that's it for me.
Thanks for that. Where can we watch this this web series?
It's on YouTube. It's called Max and Mousy. Mousy is spelled with 2 E's instead of a Y.
Awesome. Next, we have Sarah and Ben.
Yeah, it's been an incredible experience. I think like everybody has had. When we look at it, I can't be arrogant enough to say what I believe the fallout of everything's going to be. I think on a bigger scale, there's a few different things that I think is true for us. The community has been a huge piece of it, having people around who you can connect with and who can, sort of support each other. And I think on a global level, that's really what we're seeing, that people have to work together and figure out how to join hands again and pull in the same direction, which is always a challenge. And I think it's really incredible that that's what we have to do to make it through this. But with saying that, in terms of filmmaking, I think it's really, I think that storytelling is going to be really important over the next year. It's going to help people to continue to face what's ahead and to make it through it. So I think our role as filmmakers and storytellers is more important today than it ever has been. And I think that you'll probably see that continue into the next few years, if you ask me.
We've had a couple projects where, like you, Rob, we had things that were either just in the works already before COVID hit, and the timing was really fortunate. We actually had just wrapped shooting another documentary that we jumped into following after Guardians of the Grasslands. It's called Marquee Rising, and it's a 27-minute short historical short documentary about the oldest surviving vaudeville theater in Western Canada, the Bailey Theater in Camrose, Alberta. So it's a really cute story. And we interviewed a lot of people. We shot footage of some really cool events that were happening at this theater. And we had just finished shooting and we were into editing in like February, March, when all of a sudden things were getting crazy. And so we were able to wrap up that project, and that was through TELUS Story Hive. So we counted ourselves really fortunate that that didn't get interrupted or hijacked by everything going on. And then kind of through the summer, we have some corporate clients that we're so fortunate to have that have kept us busy with, we can't have our event now. So all of a sudden there's this increasing demand for people who can do video production, right? So wearing two hats, being kind of filmmaker and corporate videographers and having clients has kept us going too. So we're really, really thankful for that as well. One last thing, we're working right now on editing a series of stories of some old timers from the kind of the 40s and 50s and 60s from the Canadian railway industry, where we interviewed some guys that were in their late 80s and early 90s. And this was supported by CN Rail and the Canadian Northern Society. And their ambition was to capture some of these stories before they disappeared. And it was another case of like just super fortunate that we were able to film these interviews before the lockdown and capture the footage that we needed. And now we're working on piecing those stories together. So I think that none of us, like Sarah said, none of us know, we don't have a crystal ball to know how long this is going to last. But I think it's made us really appreciate capturing stories when we can.
Next, I think we are going to Patrick. What are your thoughts on COVID and how that's changed storytelling, or your interaction with telling stories?
Well, I think my fellow filmmakers summed it up pretty well. Kind of the ideas like to COVID or to not COVID when you're crafting a story. I think maybe a question will be, now that we have a vaccine, how long are we going to kind of be in this COVID state, whether we'll go back to relative normalcy in a couple months or 6 months, or we're going to be wearing masks for the next 2 or 3 years, where you're going to see in stories, domestic dramas, people going to the grocery store in 2022 with their masks on. So that'll be interesting. And again, it was similar to me that the first couple months, it was a little bit, it was tough to get creative because there was so much stress and anxiety. So especially for me, who is someone who's maybe a little less fond of germs than the average person, I particularly had a hard time with it. But I think another interesting thing about the COVID is locations, and specifically, like I was just working on a PSA I'm editing right now that we shot completely outside, even though we were rolling sound for the entire thing, just because we needed to, because we wanted to be safe and all that. And, we didn't want to be indoors, people have masks off and stuff. So I think that might, shape our stories, whether we're going to be, locations are obviously, as the rest of the filmmakers know, are so critical in filmmaking, whether it's documentary or narrative. So I wonder if that's going to be an aspect that really shapes our, our stories. I know specifically the sets that I've been on have had limits of crew members in certain areas, and I know locations has been, having a hard time trying to secure locations because people aren't often willing to let people into their houses or their place of business because they don't want a bunch of people in there, So again, yeah, just locations. I think that'll be interesting, and maybe we're gonna as well. Maybe I know there was a film that I think is about to come out that was it's two. I think it was I think his name's Sam Levinson. He did that show Euphoria. He made a movie that's just two characters in a house during COVID, during lockdown. So that could be interesting to see. Maybe there's going to be stories that are just kind of take place in just one location during COVID, maybe too. So,
yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Obviously, I think from a documentary perspective, social issue perspective, I think it's COVID and the pandemic has exacerbated so many things. I think we've seen, a lot of cracks in societal issues. And so I'll be curious to see a lot of documentaries, even narratives, I'm sure, that are going to talk about a lot of the things that we went through with Black Lives Matter. The environment continues to be a huge topic, and it's become even a bigger topic. And I think that'll be really, really interesting. So I think for Sarah and I, yeah, we are interested in sort of continuing to make films on societal issues that have either been exacerbated or we were passionate about. And we as a result of making The Great Disconnect, we feel like we can approach this film with a little less chaos and a bit more organization. So we're looking forward to that. But it'll be really, really interesting to see what comes about it. And I hope we come back to some sort of normalcy from a social standpoint, but I do hope that we don't go back to, how things were. I think that if we continue to be in a place of business as usual, I think it's not good. There's a film called Surviving Progress, and I remember it was a documentary. So you can imagine what it entails. And I just hope that with all the tools and all the technological advances, we use them properly and not to our disadvantage.
Mm-hmm. And I couldn't agree with Sarah more that storytelling is so important. And I think, especially with everything that 2020 brought, it's really important that we hear stories, even from diverse voices and diverse perspectives. One thing that's really resonated with me reflecting on our film throughout this year is the whole idea of echo chambers and, and just that we just get stuck into, hearing what we want to hear, and it's just this feedback loop, and I don't think it's doing any of us favors. And I think that this is where filmmakers, whether it's narrative or documentary, can really play a role I think in developing empathy and just understanding. And I really want that to be the center of the work that we do as we move forward.
Thank you to all of you for sharing these reflections and your experiences, and this theme of human connection, I think, is such a strong one that came out through all of the filmmaking panels of the Ottawa Canadian Film Festival 2020. It really illustrated and highlighted how the power of storytelling is one that brings people together to help people understand each other, no matter if it's a documentary film or a scripted film or an experimental film. It is a way of getting people to think about something that is important, that is hard to put into words. And so I congratulate all of you for being successful in doing that and making such amazing films that we're so happy to have on our programming. And with that, I want to say again, thank you to all of the filmmakers who were a part of the Ottawa Canadian Film Festival 2020. And thank you to the audience who watched these films and asked great questions. And stay tuned for what's happening next year. Hopefully we'll moved away from Zoom fatigue and have some kind of normalcy. But who knows what's going to happen? But taking a page from this conversation we've had today, it's the importance of connection and to reach out to each other and to think about, you know, what's important to each of us in terms of surviving the next period. So thank you for that message, and thank you for being a part of this amazing conversation. Thank you to our sponsors, the City of Ottawa and the Ontario Arts Council. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Nice to meet all of you.
Yeah.
Nice to meet everyone.